James, Chapter 43. Please, ma'am, I started. Silence! She cracked the crop across my shoulder. The back door opened and Hannah entered. Oh, excuse me, she said, turning to leave. Stay, madam ordered. Hannah let the door close and murmured, Yes, madam, her eyes stealing once to me, then quickly glanced away. I fought the urge to run for the knife in the drawer. Madam paced in front of me. I have never in my life been so humiliated. She paused and put in a mimic face. I saw your little black girl talking to the rebel officer on Warren Street. Do you allow your slaves to consort with the enemy? I could not swallow or breathe. She brought the crop down with a crack on the edge of the table. Jane Drinkwater said this to me. Jane Drinkwater, the biggest gossip in New York. Madam paced again, her hair flying loose and her manner quite unsteady. I said, No, Jane, you must be mistaken. Not our Sal. Colonel Hawkins himself uses her for her errands. She stopped suddenly, and Jane says, No, Anne, your girl was speaking to a rebel prisoner on Warren Street. It's hard to miss the mark on her face. From my carriage, I saw her take a note from his hand. I opened my mouth to protest, but then she slashed at me again. This time the blow opened a cut on my forehead. Give me that note, Madam demanded. I have no note, ma'am, I said quiet. She held out her hand. Liar, give me the paper or I'll turn you over to the British commander so fast your fool head will spin. Her voice shook with rage. I reached into my pocket and I pulled out the folded note. Madam looked over to Hannah. See, you just need to be firm with them. Hannah said nothing. A drop of blood rolled down the side of my face, and I clutched the note in my fist. Give it! Madam narrowed her eyes. Did you hear me, girl? Everybody carried a little evil in them. Mamma once told me Madam Lockton had more than her share. The poison had eaten holes through her soul and made room for vermin to nest in her. Girl! Madam stamped her foot on the floor. The evil inside of me woke and crackled like lightning. I could wrap my hands around her throat. I could brain her with a poker, thrust her face into the flames. I could beat her senseless with my fist. I shook from the effort of holding myself still, clutching the crumpled paper. Mamma said we have to fight the evil inside of us by overcoming it with goodness. She said it was a hard thing to do, but it made us worthy. I breathed deep to steady myself. I threw the captain's note into the fire. Hannah gasped. Madam shrieked and pushed me out of the way, but the paper was already alit. She dropped the crop and smacked me again in the face with her hand, as she had the day I first landed in New York. You foul, bloody wench! She reached behind her and picked up a bowl and hurled it at me. I ducked and it crashed against the hearth. I will sell you! I will auction you at dawn on Monday. I will sell your demon sister too, to the most cruel, heartless master I can find. The devil himself, if he wants. She paused to catch her breath. Ruth? Hannah stepped forward. I do believe there is a knock at the front door, madam, she said. But she already sold Ruth. Madam glared at her. Then answer it, you bloody fool. Didn't she? As Hannah left, Madam brushed back her hair, gathering her dignity. I stood by the fire where the note had burned to fine ash. I could not think of what might happen next. Madam tugged at her short gown. What's that stupid look on your face? You didn't know I still owned her, did you? Ruth? Heard the name escape my mouth and kicked. Once the oh shoot, sorry. Brat, Madam spat. I couldn't find a buyer. Had to ship her down to Charleston. I shall tell the estate manager to get rid of her and to toss her into the swamp. Her death will be on your head, you insolent fool. Hannah came back from the hall. The hairdresser, madam. What? Madam wheeled about. What did you say? The hairdresser is come to prepare you for the ball. The Queen's ball, ma'am. You must leave in a few hours. Madam cleared her throat and stood straighter. Of course. You must first help me into my gown. Hannah nodded. Yes, ma'am. Lock the girl in the potato bin, then come upstairs. The bin was more than half filled with potatoes and smelled of damp earth and worms. There was not enough room to sit up, but lying down I was like lying in a bed of rocks. I wanted to scream and pinched myself hard to fight the urge. I did not want to give Madame any satisfaction. Overhead came the noises of footsteps as a hairdresser performed his job and left, and the colonel returned from the headquarters to change into his dress uniform, and Madame sent Hannah running for this folderol and that. There was the sound of horse hoofs, and the roll of the carriage wheels up to the front door opened and then closed, and the house felt quiet, save for Hannah's steps in the kitchen. A light appeared through the boards of the bin. It's me, Hannah said. She's gone. The light was set on the ground. Then there was a fumbling key in the padlock. The bin door opened and Hannah peered in. I brought you some things. Here. She handed me a chamber pot, a blanket, and a mug of water. It ain't right to lock you away with nothing. You ain't an animal. Please let me go. Please, I pleaded. But before I could say anything further or reach for her, she had slammed down the door and shot home the lock again. I'll be back at dawn to check on you then, she said. Try to sleep. Please, Hannah, I cried. Please, I beg of you. Her footsteps flew up the stairs and the door slammed. I thought I heard the knob, but heard her sob, but perhaps I didn't. The bees overtook me then, and evening moved into night. They ate through me and hived up in my brain pan with a loud buzz, the wings beating me into submission. Someone whimpered and cried, and it must have been me, but it mattered not, for I was already dead. I was only a few hours away from perhaps until my heart would stop beating in truth, and the bees would fly off to haunt someone else. And then came the sound of a distant roar, like a lion just sprung up from a trap. The bees froze, and I froze, waiting. No one was home except Lady Seymour, and she was not capable of making noise. The roar came again. I cocked my head and listened. It did not come from the streets, nor the house above. It was not cannon fire. 'Twas inside of me. A thought, a thunderous loud. Ruth was alive, alive, and in Charleston, in South Carolina, not on a ship and not on an island, alive, and in a town I can walk to. My toes wiggled in the sturdy black shoes, and my legs itched. I lay as flat as I could on the bumpy mound of potatoes. I kicked once at the boards of the bin. My heavy shoes made a terrible loud sound on the wood. I stopped and counted to 100. There came no sound overhead, no commotion out in the street. I kicked it again at the same spot. The potatoes under me shifted and the mug of water overturned. I kicked a third time. The boards did not move at all. I cursed the carpenter who had built this tomb. There had to be a way out. I kicked, I stomped, I slammed, I raged and screamed and fought. Nothing happened. I stopped, wiped the sweat from my face, and closed my eyes. Think! The bin stood a little taller than Ruth, and was as long in both directions as it was tall. I reached up to touch the boards above my head. They were rough hewn, put together with cold nails. My fingertips traced the length of each board, feeling along the splinters and knots in the wood. The top was solid as a brick wall, each nail fastened tight. I fought back the panic that rose in my throat and tested the strength of each board that ran from the top to down the sides. All strong, all sound. Think, remember. When Ruth and I slept down here, the far corner of the cellar went muddy in heavy rain. Maybe the damp had eaten at the boards. I moved over to that corner of the bin and scooped the potatoes out of the way, heaping them behind me. I sat back and put my feet on each board in turn and pushed. The third board I tried, gave away a little. So did the next two. I moved the potato heap so I could best lean against it and push with my legs. I kicked. There was a quiet crack. I kicked again and leaned forward to feel the boards. The one had a piece chipped off where the wood was rotted through. The other had a long splint in it. I leaned back and took a deep breath, and then I kicked with all my strength until the wood broke and flew into the dark. I took the stairs two at a time and paused before I entered the kitchen. The house was still silent. I hurried down the hall, past the grandfather clock, and up the stairs to the drawing room. I needed a map, and I had a mind to steal a pass or two if I could. I threw some wood on the fire and lit the candle from the flames and carried it to the long dining table covered with maps and countless papers. I lit the rest of the candles on the tables as if preparing for a feast, and then searched through the papers, throwing those that were useless to me on the floor. Finally, I found a map that showed the colonies from Massachusetts down to Georgia. The distance of Rhode Island to New York was the same as the tip of my little finger to the knuckle first knuckle under it. From New York to Charleston stretched all the way down my fingers to the palm. The crackling wood fire startled me. I glanced up. There was a movement over the hearth, and for an instant my heart caught in my throat. A ghost? The firelight brightened. No, not a ghost. I caught the sight of myself in the large mirror that hung over the mantel. I could scarce recognize me. My hand had fumbled for a candle. I moved to the mirror, guarding the flame, and lit the oil lamp that were set into the wall. The mirror caught the light and reflected it back at me. I leaned in. In truth, it seemed as if I was looking at a stranger who lived beyond the glass. My face was thinner than I remembered, and longer from brow to chin. My nose and mouth recollected Mamma's, but the set of my eyes, those came from Papa. As I stared, their two faces came forth and drifted back until I could only see me. I turned my head to the side a bit and studied the brand on my face. For the first time, studied it hard. The capital I that proclaimed my insolent manners and crimes. I leaned closer to the mirror. The letter was a pink ribbon embroidered on my skin. I touched it, smooth and warm, flesh made into silk. The scars on Papa's cheeks had been 3 lines across his cheek, carved with a sharp blade. He was proud of his marks. In the country of his ancestors, they made him into a man. I traced the I with my fingertip. This was my country mark. I did not ask for it, but I would carry it as Papa carried his. It made me his daughter. It made me strong. I took a step back, seeing near my whole self in the mirror. I pushed back my shoulders and I raised my chin, my back straight as an arrow. This mark stands for Isabel. The clock struck 11 and it made me jump. I had much to do in little time. The fastest way off the island was a boat. Much as the thought made me tremble, I searched through the sea of papers on the table until I found a chart of the tides. I ran my finger down the columns. Huzzah! The tide would not turn against me for a few hours. I lacked only a pass. Colonel Hawkins had been in the habit of keeping them locked in the chest in the library, but he had become sloppy and overworked since the rebel victories. I opened the drawers of the secretary table and looked through the large boxes of official papers. There! I grabbed the paper and dashed to a small side table for a quill and a bottle of ink. I crowded the candles in close together to give me enough light. Took a deep breath to steady my hand. I dipped the quill. I took a second breath and bent over to fill it in the empty bits of the pass. I wrote in the 18th of January in the blank space. It had been some time since I wrote out letters. The J wobbled and the R appeared to be an N. I set the quill down, wiped my damp hands on my skirt, and picked it up again. This is to certify to whomever it may concern that the bearer hereof. That was where I had to write my name. I scratched out Isabel and stopped. I was not a Lockton, nor a Finch. Isabel, Rhode Island, that would not do. Elizabeth Cuffy, after Papa, or Elizabeth Dinah, after Mamma. I closed my eyes and thought of home, the smell of fresh cut hay and the taste of raspberries, robins chasing bugs in the bean patch, setting worms to work in the base of the corn plant, showing Ruth what was weed and what was flower. I opened my eyes and dipped the quill, and I wrote out my true name. Isabel Gardner, being a free Negro, has the commandant's permission to pass from this garrison to whatever place she thinks may be proper. It was signed with lots of fancy titles that belonged to the colonel and the commandant and the king himself. I wished that there would have been a space for Her Majesty Queen Charlotte of Great Britain to sign too. She and me shared a birthday now, for I was reborn as Isabel Gardner, and I had the paper to prove it.